Okay, here is a quick lecture on moral nihilism. Now, I have a longer lecture on my YouTube channel. There are more details, and you can check that out. In this one, I'm going to try to concentrate the very important ideas behind moral nihilism. Okay, let me start. Nihilism, the word itself, nihilism, first of all, derives from the Latin word nothing, nihil. And the word nihilism is attached to many philosophical views. Okay, so for example, there's metaphysical nihilism, which is the view that concrete objects do not exist or might not exist, or epistemological nihilism, which argues that knowledge doesn't exist or it's impossible to attain. Mereological nihilism, this is a very interesting, fascinating philosophical view that says that objects with proper parts do not exist. They're only tiny building blocks in the universe. And also there is the possibly the most popular one, the one that I think that when you say the word nihilism, most people think of this one, existential nihilism. They think of all those French philosophers or some German philosophers, all depressed because life has no intrinsic meaning, there has no value, there's no purpose, etc. There's also political nihilism, which is the rejection of political structures and also structures like family and any social structure. So these are not the relevant types of nihilism that I'm concerned about in this lecture, but rather I'm concerned about moral nihilism or ethical nihilism. You can call it either way. It wouldn't be wrong. Now, moral nihilism, let me explain it very quickly what it is. The idea of moral nihilism is the following. Morality does not exist. Okay, which is a weird statement to make because we understand what it means. Santa Claus doesn't exist or potatoes exist. But what does that mean, morality doesn't exist? Well, more specifically, what moral nihilists have in mind is that nothing in the world can be regarded as right or wrong, or even good or bad, or beautiful for that matter, but that's a different type of nihilism. So in other words, there's no moral value. There's no value according to moral nihilism. There are no moral truths, therefore. Nothing is morally true or false. For example, if I say that slavery is wrong, is that sentence true or false? It's going to be false according to nihilism. Or, as we will see later, it's meaningless. It has no meaning. It just expresses an emotion. And consequently, according to ethical nihilists, there are no moral duties. I mean, I don't have any obligations. If nothing is true or false in morality, right or wrong, I have no obligations, no duties. No one does. So consequently, no one is praiseworthy or blameworthy for what they do. There's no moral reason to do or not do anything, according to moral nihilism. Now, this is, as you can see already, it's a very, very extreme ethical view, and I'm going to try to explain what leads a person to this ethical view. And one of the reasons why I want to briefly touch upon that is because many people are under the impression that moral nihilists are at the same time monsters. There are people who recommend immorality. They recommend murdering and pillaging. No, 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 no. All that is false. That is not. It's not the case. Moral nihilism is a meta-ethical view, and so a moral nihilist philosopher or scientist or thinker would say to you the following: I don't believe that when I say to someone that he or she has done wrong, I'm expressing something that corresponds to reality, other than just making a statement that might help maybe society be cohesive, or it is a statement that represents just one piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle will be the entire puzzle will be a system, a human-made system that we call morality. But there's no such thing as morality. I mean, nature is what it is. It is just nature. There's no morality in trees, in sand. It's all it is. That's all you get in nature. You understand? So moral nihilism, in a sense, is also a very materialistic or a naturalistic view of ethics, because it says we recognize that there are objects, physical objects, and these objects can be studied and understood intelligently by the sciences, but there's nothing like morality or moral values or moral truths that we can study, or because there aren't any. Now, you might ask yourself, but why is it that we use moral language, for example, every single day? And why do we believe that some things are right and some things are good or bad or wrong? The moral nihilist, well, there are several views within moral nihilism or ethical nihilism, but I think that most nihilists would reply the following. The reason why you and I and society and many people have moral beliefs, and we talk in terms of morality, in terms of right, wrong, good or bad, moral, immoral, is because we are, after all, evolved animals. And in the process of evolution, behaving in a certain way rather than another helped our species survive. And so this illusion of morality has an evolutionary meaning and purpose and significance. But that's all. There's nothing above and beyond that. Now, I'm going to focus in the following slides on specifically the critique of ethics that was given by the philosopher A.J. Ayer, specifically in his book Language, Truth, and Logic, and also the Subjectivity of Values by J.L. Mackie. It was published in 1977. The title of the book is not The Subjectivity of Values. That's the chapter, the relevant chapter. The book is Inventing Morality. I recommend reading those books. They're very important philosophically in a history of philosophy. But also, I'm going to mention a few points from an inquiry concerning the principles of morals, which was published in 1751 by the great David Hume. And let's start with Hume, because I think that David Hume might or might not be called a moral nihilist. He might object to that. I don't know if he were alive today, but I think that's where it all starts. Now, Hume famously, and I'm not going to spend an hour on Hume because there are other lectures, but essentially Hume's moral philosophy is the following, in a nutshell. Now, Hume recognized that there is an abyss, a logical chasm, a huge distance between what we see in the world and what we experience in the world and what the world or how the world ought to be. For example, here is a fact. You have a pimple on your nose. Moral judgment. You ought to get rid of that pimple. Now, notice that I think it's very easy, maybe not for all people, but I think it's very obvious that you could not possibly derive the moral judgment from a fact. You just cannot do it. It would be a logical mistake, right? How could you possibly say that you have a moral obligation to get rid of a pimple on your face because you have a pimple on your face? Now, Hume observes that all the morality, all the moral philosophers, all the ethicists proceed exactly in this fashion, and they never realize that they're making a huge mistake. Let's try again with an argument. Let's see if we put it in the form of an argument with premises and a conclusion. See what happens. Premise 1. If you punch me, you will physically harm me. Premise 2. Physical harm is wrong. Conclusion 3. Therefore, you ought not to punch me. But again, the argument here would be invalid because no moral judgment follows from a matter of fact. I mean, the idea is, if you punch me, you will physically harm me. And that's all it is. That's the only conclusion that you can draw from the fact that you're punching a person. If you're punching a person, what happens? Well, that person is going to be hurt. There's going to be pain, crying, all sorts of things. But now when you get into premise 2, you are absolutely abandoning the world, the physical world of observations and what the world is like, and you're making a jump into an abyss, the moral abyss, and that jump is not warranted by reason. When you say physical harm is wrong, but what does that mean, wrong? How do you demonstrate that it is wrong? We know that physical harm hurts people, but we don't know that physical harm is wrong. We're just assuming that it is wrong. Now, I know that for many people, this is a puzzler here. Many people might be thinking, watching this video, what are you talking about? Isn't it obvious that it is wrong? Well, it's not really that obvious because it's not as if the punching or the harm or the hurt, the pain, is attached to a moral principle or a moral value or some moral substance. The idea that it is wrong to punch someone is something that human beings have invented, according to Hume, okay? So don't tell me Professor Alvaro is saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just explaining to you because I think it is morally wrong. But David Hume would say, but what do you mean morally wrong? It's not like there is a morally wrong principle in space and time or beyond space and time waiting to be instantiated by might punching someone in the face. So Hume says, no. Wait a minute. The only thing that we could possibly mean by saying that punching a person is wrong is to say that we don't like it. That's all. That's the best that we can do. We don't like it. Hume in his treatise says we turn our attention to our own breasts, right, into our heart, and we feel a feeling of disapproval. And that's the basis for morality. Approval or disapproval. The things that we don't like, we call it wrong. The things that we, actions or people that we like, we call them right or good. Okay. Now, I know it might be complicated, and my explanation is not thorough. It would require further clarification. I don't have time to do it in this video. As I said, you can watch another video for that. Because now I want to talk about this idea that morality doesn't exist objectively in the world, in the universe. It's not for Hume, moral value, moral principles, moral truths, moral properties are not things that really exist as, for example, oxygen exists, or even for example numbers. For some mathematicians, numbers might be necessary truths that exist, and they cannot not exist, but they are there somehow. For Hume, morality, no, it's totally based on our emotions. Now, the moral nihilists of the 20th and 21st century were inspired by Hume. And I'm going to explain two specific views of moral nihilism: emotivism and error theory. The main difference between the two is that emotivism is a form of nihilism that we can define as non-cognitive. So it will fall under non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivism is the view that when you utter a moral sentence, a moral statement, like, for example, slavery is wrong, that statement has no, cognitively speaking, has no reference to anything external. So it's not in the business of saying anything that can be true or false. Or put it another way, the statement slavery is wrong has no factual meaning. Okay, it's a sentence that expresses some kind of attitude or emotion. Error theory, on the other hand, falls under cognitivism, which is the opposite, which says that moral statements are statements that can be either true or false. Now, the caveat there is that, according to error theory, all the moral statements are false. They're all false. They will always be false. They have been false. They're just false. But they can be true or false. They're just false. Emotivism says they're neither true nor false because they don't mean anything. They don't refer to anything. So let me start with A.J. Ayer in emotivism. Now, think about the following statements. Ice is cold. Now, ice is cold. What does that mean? It's true, right? That ice is cold? Well, how do we know that it's true? Well, touch it, right? That verifies that the statement ice is cold is true. What about your socks are dirty? Well, how do you verify it? I take your sock, I look at it, I smell it, yuck, it smells, it's dirty, right? And you can see it, it's dirty, so it's true, right? Now you see that there's something out there that confirms the truth, that makes them true, that makes these statements true. Ice is cold, your socks are dirty, many other statements. Now, A.J. Ayer would observe the following then. What about when I say, what about lying is wrong? Or slavery is immoral? Now, what facts can be observed that could possibly verify the truth or falsity of these statements? Right? Ice is cold, you touch it, that's a fact. Cold. True. Your socks are dirty. You look at your socks, you see that there's grime, there's dirt on them. That fact makes the statement true. But what makes the statement lying is wrong or slavery is immoral true or false? What kind of verification? What kind of fact? You see, a statement can be true because of the meaning of the terms that it contains, or two, it can be true because of some facts, or three, neither true nor false, so we call that nonsensical. Let me give you an example of something that is true by definition. A bachelor is an unmarried man. Take a dictionary as I'm talking to you. Take a moment. Look up the word bachelor. What's going to be the definition? An unmarried man. Great. So the statement, a bachelor is an unmarried man, is true by definition. What about a triangle is a three-sided shape? Once again, look up the definition of a triangle. And part of the definition is going to be that it is a three-sided shape. What makes that statement true is the fact that, not the fact, but the meaning of the term triangle and the meaning of the term three-sided shape. Now, other things are true by fact. For example, I had pizza for lunch. What makes this statement true? Well, if I had pizza for lunch, then the statement is true. But if I had a sandwich for lunch, then the statement is false. So as you can see, there's a fact. There's a fact or a state of affairs in the world that happened that renders that statement either true or false. What about the next one? There is a tree in my backyard. Well, once again, this statement can be either true or false. Right? You're going to have to find a tree in a backyard. The third kind of statement is a statement that is neither true nor false, but it's just nonsensical because it has no reference to anything that really exists in the world. Let me give you an example. The Emperor of the United States of America is blonde. Is that true? Well, it cannot be true because there is no such being as the Emperor of the United States. Now, the question is that statement false? But it is not false either, because think about what you're saying if you're saying that it is false that the Emperor of the USA is blonde. To which I will reply, oh, he is not? I thought he was blonde. So what color is his hair? No, you don't understand. The Emperor of the United States doesn't exist. Well, then if it doesn't exist, the statement cannot be false either. But then what kind of sentence is that? Well, it's a nonsensical statement. It's an empty statement. Okay? That is neither true nor false. It doesn't refer to anything that really exists. Now, a statement that's true by definition, this is very important. A statement that is true by definition can never be false. For example, a triangle is a three-sided shape. This statement is true. It was true. It's been true. It will be true. It is true in all possible worlds. There's no circumstance or circumstances that could make this statement a false statement. But how do I verify that? How do I know that? How can I be so sure? Because when I look at the meaning of the terms, triangle, sided, and so forth, I realize that triangles are three-sided shapes by definition. And unless you change the definition, that statement will always be true, and it cannot be false. Now, a statement that's true by fact, as I call it by fact, or by contingency, can be false. Let me give you an example. There's a tree in my backyard. Might be true now, but it might be false later. And to verify its truth, you must look in the backyard and see if there is a tree. Is that the tree you were talking about? Yes. Okay, so the statement is true. What makes it true? That fact. Tomorrow, oh, the tree is gone. Well, then that statement is no longer true. Now, here's the question. We're getting to the point. Are moral statements true by definition? It seems to me, think about it. You can pause this video and think about it for a moment. Take a statement like slavery is wrong. Is that true by definition? Well, it doesn't seem that way because wrong is not the meaning of slavery and slavery is not the meaning of wrong. They don't mean the same thing. But are moral statements true by fact? Think about it. Slavery is wrong. Is that true by fact? Consider two problems. Problem one. If it were true that moral statements are true by fact, all moral statements would be true, well, by accident, and could be false under some later circumstances. Problem two. If they're true by fact, if slavery is wrong, or any other moral statement were true by fact, by some fact, exactly what fact corresponds to the wrongness of slavery that would confirm its wrongness? Think about it. Can we say that the fact that confirms the wrongness of slavery is the fact that slavery hurts people? Well, no, because in order for you to say that the pain that the slaves are suffering is what makes slavery is wrong true, requires a further explanation. In other words, I can ask you, but why is it wrong to cause pain to some people? you might reply to me, it is wrong because they don't like it. But I could reply and ask you back, but why is it morally wrong to do something to a person when that person doesn't like that thing to be done to him? And as you can see, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. And in any case, I'm not asking you the effects of slavery. The original question is, what makes slavery wrong? So if you say pain is what makes it wrong, that means that you now have to justify why pain is wrong. And in order to justify that pain is wrong, you're bringing up something entirely different. The fact that people don't like pain. Okay? But what makes that wrong? What makes it wrong that I'm causing pain to a person and that person doesn't like it? Why is that wrong? See if you can answer that question. Notice that every time you're giving me an answer, you're moving the target. You're not answering the original question. Slavery is wrong because this fact makes it wrong. Every time you bring up a fact, for example, that it hurts, that fact requires an explanation. You can always ask of that fact, but why is that wrong? But why is that wrong? But why is that wrong? And either you accept by definition, you accept by stipulation that it is wrong. Okay, that would be culturally relative, or you admit that no moral statement expresses an objective fact. That's the problem. So moral statements cannot be true by definition. They cannot be true by fact, because there is no fact that can be attached to these statements. Or air would say to you, there's no wrongness in the air. There's no wrongness in the fabric of the universe. Okay, that corresponds to something like slavery. There's none. So if these statements are not true by definition, and they are not true by some fact, what are they? They fall in the third category. Remember the third category? They are neither true nor false. So in other words, they are nonsensical. They're nonsensical statements. Really? But why are they so important? Why do we make so much out of moral statements and morality then? Well, there's a function. They have a function. And according to Ayer, moral statements have the function of expressing people's emotions. Okay? So, for example, if I say to you, you make me sick, this is an assertion. This could be true or false. Right? You can ask me, is it true that I make you sick? And I can say, yes, it is true. But what if I texted you an emoji, this emoji right here? Is that true or false? You see, it's a wrong question to ask. An emoji is neither true nor false. So what's the function of the emoji? The function is to express a certain feeling, I feel sick. Right? Or if I say, I am in severe pain, well, that's either true or false. You can find out. But if I said, ouch, the exclamation, ouch, is neither true nor false. It does not carry a truth value, but it is a vocalized emotion, or feeling, a deep feeling. Or if I go to a show and I yell boo, well, that sound, boo sound, is not a phrase that can be true or false. They can carry the property of truthness, of truth or falsity. It's just a sound. And if you ask me, why did you make that sound? Well, isn't it obvious? Because I don't like the show. Okay. That is, according to Ayer, the function of moral statements. It can't be anything else, because when we say things, moral statements, when we utter moral statements, for example, you helped that elderly lady cross the street. You did something good. You did good. That is morally good, or it is the right thing to do. Ayer says there's no nothing out there in the world that would make that statement true or false. Okay. Now let me explain Mackey's view on this subject. His view is referred to as error theory. Now, Mackey observes that when people make moral statements, it is absolutely not true that people intend to express emotions. It's not true at all. Think about it for yourself. Just pause the video for a moment and think about it. When I say that I'm against the war, for example, am I expressing an emotion? Certainly not. Most people intend to speak truths. They say things like that. The war is immoral, or abortion is right. Most people, when they say these things, they mean it as if they were saying something that is true or false. Okay? But because Mackey agrees with Ayer that there aren't any moral properties or truths or duties in the world, then according to Mackey, all moral statements are just false. You see? Moral value, moral truth, moral properties would make moral statements true or false, but no such things exist in the world. We human beings don't realize, we don't even think about it when we speak in moral language. We don't even realize that values, truths, properties don't exist. It's, to give you an analogy, as if after reading Shakespeare, you went on talking about the story, as if it really happened, as if the characters in Shakespeare's play were real, and they were doing what they were doing. that would be an error, wouldn't it? It would be an error on our part, on your part. And that's the point. It would be an error. Now, why don't moral truths, moral values, moral properties exist? Well, first of all, right off the bat, Mackey says, just go around the world, look around the world. There's such a variation in moral values that I don't see how any moral value or any moral truth could be objectively true. For example, some people are monogamous, other people they have 10 wives, and who's right, who's wrong? Well, there's no way to establish who's right or who's wrong because there's no ultimate truth, Mackey would say. But now consider the at least four important facts. First of all, what is a moral value or a moral truth or a moral property in the first place? If anything, these moral values, moral truths, or moral properties would not be physical objects, physical things, right? It's not like there are atoms and quarks and subatomic particles, and in addition to those, there are moral truths and moral values and moral properties. They're not like that. But then if there are these moral properties and truths and values are not physical things, how can we even gain any knowledge about these non-physical things, even if they existed? But they don't exist. Point 2. Suppose that moral values or moral truths or moral properties existed. Suppose that they existed. Now, at that point, what role exactly would they play in our lives? If they don't, for example, guide our behavior, what is the point? If their existence did not cause us to see what's right and what is wrong, then what would be the point? Even if they existed, they would be useless. So for all intents and purposes, we can simply say they don't exist. Now, point 3. Since these things that I described, moral values, moral truths, moral properties, they're not physical things. They wouldn't be physical things even if they existed. They would have to be non-physical. How can they possibly relate to us? How can they possibly be useful to us in any way? And point 4, which is related to the previous, how would these values attach to physical events, like, for example, slavery or generosity? If there are these moral values and properties in the universe somewhere, how would these moral properties or truths or values how would they know how to be instantiated and attach themselves on slavery and generosity and things of that nature? So, Mackey concludes that for these reasons, at least, there's no sense that we can talk about moral values or moral truths, moral properties. They don't exist. And if these things do not exist, guess what? Morality doesn't exist. So morality is an error. It's a mistake. We are talking about a fiction. It might not be useful, but it's a fiction. Okay? Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. and I'll see you in the next video.